Rick Gibson calling in.
And this is Harriet Brown calling back in. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Miss Brown. I don't know about anybody else.
Okay. I've had problems in the past.
Yeah. Oh, here we go again. It's coming back on.
Okay.
Do I have a first to approve the agenda? Motion.
So moved.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second, Harriet.
Do we have a second? Thank you. Is there any discussion? No discussion. All in favor of approving the agenda, respond with yay.
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 All opposed, nay. The agenda has been approved as written. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the April 15th meeting.
So moved.
Do I hear first? Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
I second it.
So moved.
Okay, I hear a first and a second. Is there any discussion? Discussion. Respond with approve the minutes with a yay.
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 Opposed? Nay. I think the yeas have it. The minutes of April the 15th, 2020 are approved. Now, Mr. C.D. Rhodes, I think you're on tap. Item 4 on the agenda, discuss the form for the ballot.
Certainly, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for being here. So I'm getting a lot of background noise from somebody. I'm not quite sure who it is. If everybody could mute, just unless you have a question or a comment. Feel free to unmute and comment at any time, but just not talking. You can mute your phone or your computer.
You like the kids. Mm-hmm. You like the kids on your phone.
The primary purpose of the meeting today is to really to do the sole act that this commission was created to do, which is to approve the final form of the ballot question that's going to go on the November general election ballot. The resolution that's been circulated to you includes a number of findings of fact that underpin the capital project sales tax, your authorization to act as this commission. That is primarily what you see in the findings of fact, the recitals that are at the front of the resolution. Section 1 of the resolution is really the operative part of it. It formally approves the ballot question itself as presented, which you can find, and I'm sure you've all seen it now, down in Exhibit A of the resolution. The ballot question includes the two projects that we've discussed. The first project is the wastewater treatment capacity project, which is, for all intents and purposes, the wastewater treatment plant. It includes some possible additional infrastructure, outfall lines, associated infrastructure that might go with the plant but may not be part of the plant. But by and large, Project 1 is the wastewater treatment plant. Project 2 is the sewer lines and infrastructure project And that is intended to just essentially be pump stations, sewer lines, all of the infrastructure that's necessary to connect the plant to existing customers or to new customers. If for instance, it's necessary to spend this money to connect the plant to the industrial park, then I would imagine, or it seems logical that it would be spent for those purposes. If those costs are met from some other source, if, for instance, the state provides money to pay the cost to connect the plant to the mega site and to existing commercial and industrial customers, then it may make sense to spend that money on extending lines into other areas of the county where new customers are available. And the more customers we can have, the better off we're ultimately going to be. So you'll see that that particular project is fairly expansively drafted, and that was intentional. So those are the two projects that we are intending to fund. And one difference with this particular capital project sales tax effort from a lot of them that you see in other counties across the state is that we know at the outset that the amount of money that we're going to bring in is not enough to fully fund all of these projects. The plant alone is somewhere north of $33 million. We know going in that there are other sources of funds that we're going to have in order for these projects to be viable. But at the same time, this capital project sales tax and the proceeds from it are really an absolutely essential component of meeting those full costs. So whereas you normally see a list of a number of projects that are all going to be fully funded from the proceeds of the tax, we know going in that that's not going to be the case. And that's why you see some findings, particularly in particularly F, G, and H, that are maybe a little different than you would normally see in resolutions of this kind. As I was drafting this resolution, it seemed important that we acknowledge up front that that the total amount of the project costs that are included on the ballot exceed the amount of the revenues that we actually expect to bring in. And that was done intentionally. I talked a lot with Jason and with Ty and with others at the county about the fact that the intent of everybody in this particular project is that the full amount of these proceeds be spent on these two projects to offset the cost of these two projects to the extent that they are needed. And it seemed, especially, we're drafting this resolution certainly to authorize the project to move forward, but we're also drafting it as a document that's eventually going to make its way out into the public. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that essential fact that we are ultimately going to, we know we're going to collect less than $14 million, but we adopted this resolution with the intent that just the maximum amount of proceeds that we can possibly get in are ultimately devoted to these particular projects. Now, along these same, so with that in mind, are there any questions so far? I know there was, I think Randy had a question about finding G, and while we're kind of talking about this issue, I want to give him the opportunity to comment as he thinks necessary.
Yeah, this is Randy Bright, and you hit, you called that out. I was just suggesting that we add a word like solely or exclusively in G before the expenditure, so that we nail it down to any doubters that, and to future prospects that this is indeed solely going to go to the water sewer project and its peripheral support systems. And I think adding that word will make a big difference. And I've got one other suggestion if you want to address that first one, and then I'll give you another suggestion.
Okay, sure. So there was a little bit of email traffic about this today, and I think Patty relayed back to Randy my take. My preference is to leave the language as it is, and the reasoning behind that is that I think adding solely before expended, and for those following along at home, we are in finding G, and this is the word expended in the second line of the second page. There are scenarios under the Act where these proceeds could be spent on other projects. The Act contemplates that you may bring in more money ultimately than you have projects to fund. The Act also allows the Commission to impose conditions on the expenditure of the tax proceeds, and one of the important sets of conditions that we've included here, and that we would normally include in these types of resolutions, are some flexibility in case a project at some point in time becomes impossible. So, for instance, in this case, we know that we need additional money from the state in order to fund the wastewater treatment plant. If something changes at the state level, and that money just simply does not materialize and is not going to materialize, then we're going to be sitting on a big pot of cash that has no use. And at that point in time, there needs to be some flexibility for the county to come in and declare that project to be impossible. And we would then have to find other uses for the money. The way the Act deals with that, the Act contemplates that is a possibility, that you may have money on hand without projects to spend it on. And the way that it deals with that is it says if the tax is reimposed, so if at the end of the 8-year period, the county decides to have another referendum and to reimpose the tax for another 8 years, or I guess in that case it would be 7 years, any money from the first tax has to be spent first on the projects from the first referendum. And if there are no projects left, or in our case, if any of those projects were impossible, then on the projects that are authorized by the next referendum. If the county does not reimpose the tax, so if the county opts at the end of this 8-year period to allow the tax to expire without having another referendum to reimpose it, then county council under the Act can decide how those funds are to be spent. And they have to be spent on projects that would have otherwise been permitted under the Act. So effectively, brick and mortar public projects within the county. So there are, as remote as they may be, there are conditions that could arise under the Act where the money could be spent in other ways. The intent of everything that we've done, the intent of having $14 million in projects for $11.5 million in proceeds, everything has been done with the intent of spending the money on these two projects and these two projects only. But there are some conditions, remote though they may be, where the money could be spent in other ways. And so my concern is that by adding solely there, you are essentially that word is contrary to the provisions of the Act and also to the last clause in that sentence that says that they should be spent on those projects subject to the conditions that are spelled out in Section 2. So, Randy, that's my reasoning for leaving the wording as it is right now. Ultimately, this is y'all's resolution. And my job is to give you my reasoned advice, which I've done. If you ultimately choose to include that word in there, I don't think it's the end of the world. I don't want you to think that I'm, putting my foot down here. It's not a huge deal to me, but my my reasoned advice in this case is to leave the language as it is.
And I understand that, and I appreciate you elaborating on it. I just think that adding a word like solely, and I've got a couple other possibilities here, adding a word like solely really makes it a much more sellable referendum because, there has been so much suspicion about our government in Fairfield for a long time, particularly the FFC project, that it's not adding it is going to make it a much tougher sell to the public. Plus, we could add, to your point about, well, if we find the project impossible, number one, could we just remove the sales tax in that instance, and if we do find it impossible and we have collected money, can we put a provision in that? Then if we find it impossible, then we're going to, what would happen with that money? Not specifically, but then the public or with the public input, council will have to make a decision. But quite frankly, and just in talking to other people, and I'm sure you read a letter to the editor and that sort of thing not long ago. The feedback I'm getting is, well, it needs to be ironclad that that's the way the money goes.
Well, Randy, so I understand that. What if we say, would you have any objection to adding solely before expended, and then in the last clause, it would just say subject to the conditions for the use of the tax proceeds set forth in Section 2 and the provisions of the CPST Act? I'd be fine with that if that were.
I think that's a good compromise, and that would make our job selling it so much better.
Okay. So I'm fine with that. As I said, it's not the end of the world to me. I did have a good reason for it, but I think your points are well taken.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Do you want to go ahead and, so I do want to get into the conditions a little bit. Do you want to go ahead and bring up whatever your additional comments were before we get there?
Well, I actually, the additional comment was about having something in there, if we find it impossible, that we'll quit collecting the tax. In other words, if we find it impossible, stop the project, and we're 4 years in, then the tax, the 1% goes away.
I guess the one reason I would advise against that, I think, and maybe as I speak, I'll let Jason speak to this a little bit more, because he and I have had lots of conversations around this. If this problem is not going to go away, and so, for instance, as it stands right now, the intent is to spend the vast majority of the funds on the plant and a small amount of the funds on sewer lines. But if for some reason, it's again remote, if for some reason the plant is impossible, it cannot be constructed, there's also some solution to this is going to need to be found. So it may be really important at that point to, rather than spending the money on a plant, spending it on the line project, spending far more funds on the sewer line and infrastructure project than was initially expected, which is fine, which is something that we can do. So,
that makes sense. That makes sense.
There's a lot of background noise from somebody's phone.
I can't hear him either.
I can't either.
Mr. Rhodes. Mr. Rose, this Chair Wentz, is the changing the language with that "mine" or with that word, does that reduce our flexibility in this resolution?
So, are you talking about the change that in
just mentioned, because I'm in favor myself of leaving the resolution as is, and when we go out into the public and have our town hall meetings, that's when we would discuss and answer questions that Mr. Bright has brought up. That's my take on it.
And I understand that, good, but the point is, if it's not in the resolution, then...
Yeah, I'm having a hard time hearing whoever's speaking right now.
I can't.
Jason, are we?
Did you, Ms. Herring, did you have something to have some input?
Who?
Whoever spoke last, I couldn't hear it all.
Charlene, did you have input?
No,
Brown.
it's still
Ms.
very
Brown,
hard
I'm sorry.
to
Ms.
hear.
Brown?
Yeah, it's Brown.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead, Ms. Brown.
Me? I didn't have anything.
Have any input questions for Mr. Rhodes?
No, I don't.
I don't know if you heard my response, but I was saying the answer to my last question.
Randy, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Do I need to vote on it now? Who knows?
Let's not do that yet. Randy, we're having a hard time hearing you. I don't know if you're far away from your microphone or what.
I just,
I was just saying, Ray was keeping me on the subject question, and we can move from that, but I'm still going to tell him on the phone.
Randy, we're still having a hard time hearing you. There's a lot of background noise. It might be on your end. Everybody mute their phones for a second. Let's see where our background noise is coming in.
Always difficult.
it is.
It's not.
Apologize for the difficulties.
No, but
Well, I guess I don't know if Patty or whoever's got the meeting kind of pulled up, they can mute everybody, unmute one at a time. That might be helpful too.
We're having our IT department take a look at it, CD. Just a second.
Okay, I think everybody's muted now. So I think we kind of got a little off track. Randy, we were having a really difficult time hearing you. There was a lot of background noise for whatever reason. Definitely want your input. But I'm not sure if the background noise was perhaps coming from your phone or from somebody else's. So maybe everybody else stay muted. And I know Randy had something to say, and there was another comment as well about keeping the resolution as is. I want to get everybody's input here. So maybe, Randy, if you'll unmute first and give us your thoughts, and then we can see what other comments are out there. But everybody else stay muted.
Okay, thank you, CD. My comments are, I understand Herb's point But if it's not in writing, nobody will believe us. It's got to be in writing to prove to them that what our true intent is. And I've already had questions on this, and as I said, that's come from well, I've spoken about this and written about this in the paper before, and that's always the question that comes to me. And then, number two, I agree with your explanation to my second question, so we can move on from that as far as I'm concerned. But I'm really firm on this solely or exclusively, and with your added warning at the bottom.
So to get to Herb's point, Herb, I don't think that adding the word solely with the qualifier subject to the conditions that we set forth in the resolution and the provisions of the CPST Act, I think that leaves all of our flexibility intact. It's a pretty minor change at the end of the day, and it doesn't give me any heartburn at all. Once again, ultimately, this is y'all's resolution, and so I want it to read as you want it to, as you approve it. But that change doesn't bother me at all. Are there any other comments about the topics we've discussed so far?
Okay, I think we're going to unmute one person at a time, and Mr. Rentz will call out that person, and when we call the person's name, again, our IT will unmute that person, and please give any comments that you may have.
Okay, Charlene, do you have any comments?
No, not at this time. I do think what Randy said is that we really have to be due diligent about letting people know that we're being honest and upfront, and that funds will be spent wisely, and also that if the project can't be carried forth, I think they're going to ask that question: what's going to happen with the funds?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Herring. Ms. Brown, do you have any comments?
No, not at this time.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Brown. Mr. Gibson, do you have any comments? Mr. Gibson, do you have any comments?
Yeah, could you hear me?
I heard that, but yes, could you state your comment, please?
Yeah, just clarification. Basically, the commission has no authority to actually relegate the expenditures. That's coming through and by the county council. Is that not correct?
Mr. Rhodes, can you answer that question?
Sure, absolutely. So once the commission adopts this resolution, the commission's job is done. And at that point in time, it is up to the county council to regulate the use of the proceeds as approved by the commission and approved by the voters. You are correct. The commission doesn't have any ongoing authority to monitor. The commission essentially goes away once the resolution is adopted and the referendum occurs. So you are correct. There's no kind of continuing authority there to regulate. But and I believe it might have been Miss Herring's point. I think it is going to be important to explain to folks how the money is going to be spent. And I think it's notable that in this case, oftentimes a county will have projects that are under the amount of the total amount of expected proceeds that it's going to bring in over 8 years. In this case, you've gone the additional step of approving projects that are a good bit greater than that expected amount of proceeds. And the purpose behind that, the entire reason for setting that number high, is so there ideally will not be any excess proceeds. We don't want there to be excess proceeds that county council can spend as it sees fit. We want to make sure the full amount of those taxes. So if we bring in $11 million, it'll be spent on these projects. If things go really great and sales tax receipts go up for the county and we bring in $13 million, then it'll still all go to these projects. So it really was very specifically crafted in this case. And that was at the direction of the county to make sure that the full amount of the tax proceeds go towards these two projects because they are so important. Continue the roll call here. Just make sure there are no additional comments.
Well, we went through Mr. Herring, Ms. Brown, Mr. Gibson, Mr. Bright, and Mr. Brown. Russ Brown's not here. So that was everyone that's in attendance. Could you state that change again, Mr. C.D. Rhodes?
Certainly. So the amendment that Mr. Bright has proposed is in finding G, before the word expended in the last sentence, we would add the word solely. Then under the parenthetical at the end of that sentence, we would add the words and the provisions of the CPST Act. So if the commission, if that is the will of the commission to include that change to the resolution, then we would need to just the motion would simply need to state that the resolution be approved subject to the amendment that I just described.
As amended. Right here first.
So yeah, I think the motion could just simply say, based on, as described by any Rhodes.
I so move.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that Mr. Bright?
It is, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
I'll second with Ms. Brown.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Is there any further discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of the resolution as amended, respond with yea.
Yay.
Yay.
All opposed, nay. The amendment is
Herb, can we do a
approved.
roll call? I want to make sure we've got, this is kind of the
do we
most
have a
vital
quorum
step in the whole process.
at this point?
The chair votes yea. Ms. Herring? Charlene Herring, how do you vote?
Unmuted?
Harriet Brown?
Yay.
Rick Gibson?
Yay.
Yay.
Charlene Herring?
Ms. Herring, we can't hear you if you're trying to speak.
Yay.
Thank you, Ms. Herring. And then I voted yea. So I think you have the roll call, all yeas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yeas.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing that.
So the resolution as amended has been approved. Thank you. With that fifth, I'm sorry, yes, sir, Mr. C.V. Rhodes.
I think we were about to say the same thing. That's essentially all that we need to. That's all the business we need to attend to today, unless there are any questions or any further discussion.
Are we going to say anything about?
Ms. Herring? Ms. Brown? Ms.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Are we going to do anything about the form of the ballot question?
The ballot
Mr. Rhodes,
question is
Mr. Rhodes, you can
adopted by
answer
the
that question,
resolution.
please.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Question, Mr. Rhodes.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
So the ballot question is adopted by the resolution.
I'm sorry. I can't hear anything.
There's background noise again.
Can you read the ballot question?
Okay, he's got it.
Jason, do you want me to read it? Is that what you were saying? So to respond to that question, the ballot question itself is adopted by the resolution. So that is certainly kind of a critical part of the whole process here. Were there any suggested changes to the wording of the ballot question?
This ballot question handed to an individual as they go to vote.
Yes. The ballot question, as it is presented in Exhibit A, that full, takes up a little more than a page. That full text will show up on the ballot itself. And certainly, one of the things that can be done by the county or by some other group, if they so choose, is distribute the ballot question to voters ahead of time. That's always a good idea with any kind of ballot initiative where there's complicated language, as there is here. But what you see in Exhibit A, starting with question and ending with yes, no, is the full amount of what will appear on the ballot and what will be voted on.
I have a concern. I think so many people are going to look at this and say, not read it, but see tax, no.
So without question, that's the biggest obstacle to getting one of these things passed. It is the initiatives that are successful because folks have gotten out there and explained it. And when and the majority of folks, when they show up in the voting booth, they understand the importance of the question and the proposed tax. But you're absolutely right. If folks are uninformed, they almost certainly will respond exactly as you say. That's really the critical part, is just making sure that folks understand why it is important to vote yes.
Is there any way to streamline this?
Yes. Paraphrase.
I think it is better to provide folks with more information rather than less information. The only part that you could get rid of is everything under everything under conditions and restrictions on the use of the sales and use tax is additional language. But it's really critical language because it informs voters of all of these conditions that I was talking about earlier, where the use of the proceeds might change. And as we have worked on these in other places, these conditions are critical to how the money is going to be used going forward. And so I think that they should be included. They are included in the resolution, and so it is not a legal requirement, but at least not under the statute itself. But I think informing voters of what those conditions are is important.
Jack, Mr. Rose, my understanding is the resolution will be, and the ballot question will be published in the newspaper, so people that can read it and ask questions and be educated on it, and that's going to be very helpful. I think you're right. More information, probably the better. I like the idea of streamlining it, but if we can put it out beforehand, I think that will help.
It's just a point.
Ms. Herring.
I think it's another good, but one thing, and I know this is probably impossible, to have the act when you put it or in the paper or whatever, is there any way you can have just a paraphrase of something by it? And I know we don't want to interpret it other than what it's here. We don't want anybody to interpret it differently. But again, I feel the same thing. I don't think people are going to read it. Not, there may be some in Fairfield County, but other people will just not even do it at all. So, I don't know if there's anything else, and even in our meetings or something to give this, but something alongside with it that CD, certainly an attorney can approve that would break it down so that they can understand it, whatever.
That is, that's commonly done. It's something you got to be really careful with, and I think
I know, yeah.
Probably already you understand based on your comment the reasons why you don't want to interpret it. You don't want to advocate, but it is not uncommon at all, and you see this a lot with constitutional ballot initiatives, constitutional amendments. A brief summary that explains what it is that you're voting for, or the result of a yes vote or the result of a no vote. Got to be really careful to walk that fine line between education and advocacy, but that is certainly something that we can do.
If you can provide some type of summary beside it when it's in the newspaper, is that what you just said?
Not when it's published for legal purposes, but certainly if the county wanted to publish it and include a summary, that is something that we can do. There are publication requirements that satisfy the election commission's legal obligation to publish notice of elections. I don't think you want to mess around with that. But those are really legal notices more than anything else. But we can absolutely distribute a sample ballot that includes an explanation, and if we wanted to publish something along those lines, in addition to what the Election Commission does, we can certainly do that too.
I have a suggestion.
Is that you, Mr. Bright?
Yes, thanks, Herb. I agree with both Harriet and Shirlene. I think it would help, number one, as we move forward. This underscores the importance of that being incumbent on us to act as ambassadors for this, speaking at various council meetings and writing letters to the editor, etc. And all that would be facilitated by a talking points memo draft that we could reference that would kind of boil it down as streamlined as Harriet said, to let, get through the weeds, to let everybody know what this really means. And I think it's important to put all the information out there legally. I will tell you, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, probably the biggest complaint that council gets from the ordinances is that they don't contain enough information. So by including all this information, that takes away, anybody thinking that the county is trying to hide something in this. But the talking points and us being ambassadors for those talking points would be most helpful in selling this to the public. That's all.
Are there, so kind of with all that explanation in mind, are there any other comments at this point?
I think we have agreed that there'd be some summary, written talking points, etc.
Yes.
That's going to happen, Ms. Herring. That will happen.
Okay. But I like the things that T.D. said about the constitutional amendments and how there's just a little thing there that kind of summarizes it. I don't know if that's even actually on the ballot or not.
Would you want her to help be part of it? Are you going to be writing it?
We will be reviewing it, yes.
Do you want Ms. Herring to have her to come see you? She's the vice chair.
Certainly. I mean, I think
Ms. Herring, would you like to be on board with Mr. Taylor when that's written?
That would be great.
Okay. Well,
I'm sure they know what they're doing, but
yeah, that'd be a good idea. I just talked to him, and you're welcome aboard.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Have anything else, anything further, Mr. Rhodes?
Nothing on my end.
Okay. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Okay, we have a second vote. All in favor of adjourning, respond with yay.
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 Opposed, nay. I think the ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Good. Good.